I work hard every day from home and have a stable income, but my brother Tom and his wife Jane call me unemployed and neat, not in education, employment, or training. I always wonder on what grounds they can say such things. Don't you feel guilt living in this house without working or doing household chores? How much do you think a neat like you contributes to the household? Don't act like you're doing something significant with just a little bit of money. They often throw such strong words at me. Moreover, even though I'm actually very busy with my job, they call me a useless person who can't even do household chores properly, and a parasite, telling me to leave the house implicitly. It seems they don't understand their own situation at all. They don't have the right to say such things to me. My name is Kate. When I was young, I was known as a tomboy, always getting into mischief. In junior high, I would often stay overnight at friends' houses, never worrying about my parents. By the time I reached college, I was more focused on club activities and hanging out with friends than on my studies. I probably caused a lot of trouble for my family. However, back then, every day was just so fun for me, and I never really considered how my actions might upset my parents. In stark contrast to me, there was my brother, Tom. He was the epitome of seriousness, always excellent at test scores, carrying the weight of our parents' expectations. He was the perfect embodiment of an ideal son. His demeanor was the exact opposite of mine, which probably amplified my parents' worries about me. By the way, I've occasionally heard stories about my parents' old days, and one thing I've learned is that they used to roam around and enjoy themselves just like I did when they were young. However, as they grew older and became parents after we were born, they gradually settled down. After graduating from college and getting a job, my carefree days of fun turned into days of hard work. There were reasons for this transformation. For one, Tom got married and decided to leave the house. Once he moved out, the attention and expectations from our parents shifted to me. I suddenly started to feel a bit embarrassed with the days I spent just having fun, as I began to realize that maybe my actions and behaviors were nothing but a nuisance to my parents. Then I thought that I needed to change. That's when I started working in a field I was interested in. I enjoyed it while also feeling a sense of responsibility. However, a few years later, another significant event happened in my life. My father suddenly fell sick. His health deteriorated rapidly, and in no time, he was unable to lead a normal life. After my father was hospitalized, my mother, Anne, seemed to be constantly shuttling between the hospital and home. It was heart-wrenching to see her in such distress. Witnessing my mother taking care of both my father and the household, I felt the need to step up. Our family had always depended on my father's income, whereas I knew I couldn't fully replace his role. I was determined to earn properly and support our household in whatever way I could. Despite our hopes, my father's health didn't improve. I was on the verge of finally being able to give back and support my family after causing them so much worry in the past, and the realization brought tears to my eyes. But my mother was even more devastated than I was. Seeing her so downcast and desolate was unbearable. I felt that I couldn't just grieve. I had to support her in any way I could. An idea came up to my mind: adjust my work situation to help her out more at home. When I discussed this with my boss, I was thankfully allowed to start working from home. This way, I could assist with household tasks while still fulfilling my work responsibilities. When I told my mother about this, she reassured me, saying, "It's okay, I'll handle everything. Just focus on your work, Kate." Grateful for her understanding, I was able to recalibrate and dedicate myself to my job from home. One calm day, my mother suddenly said, "It seems that Tom is considering moving into this house with Jane." With our father gone, it seemed Tom made this decision out of concern for our mother. The moment I heard this, I was taken aback and felt a rush of emotions. While I appreciated Tom's thoughtfulness, the idea of living together felt somewhat uncomfortable. Tom has always been a very serious and formal person. We had contrasting personalities. While I was the mischievous one, he was the more reserved one. We frequently clashed and fought as children. Even in our school years, he'd often make hurtful comments like, "You're not very bright, I doubt you'll ever get a decent job," or "Don't tell people at school you're my sister. I don't want others to know something so embarrassing." He works for a big corporation, and I suspect that if he knew I was freelancing with an unstable job, he'd look down on me. He always emphasized the importance of having a stable job. I fear he'll belittle me, just as he did back then. Considering how much my mother has placed her hopes in my diligent brother, I couldn't bring myself to confide in her about my feelings of disappointment and apprehension. I had no choice but to accept living with Tom and Jane. I had never met Jane, but secretly hoped that she would have a broad-minded and understanding nature. However, reality was not that easy. Life after Tom and Jane moved in was honestly quite tough. The first time I met Jane, I realized that my hidden wish wouldn't come true. Jane had a very assertive personality. She was the type to immediately voice her thoughts, and her displeasure was easily read on her face if something didn't sit well with her. Honestly, I was a bit surprised that such a person was Tom's wife. However, on the flip side of her assertive nature, Jane had a sense of balance when dealing with situations. Towards my mother, she'd say, "I'm looking forward to our time together, Anne. It's really hot today, isn't it? Shall I adjust the air conditioner?" She approached my mother with care and a friendly demeanor. She likely aimed to maintain a good relationship with Tom, the head of the household. I decided to respect that. I decided to let her handle things without interference. I believed that if I left it to her, she would manage the household well. However, the opposite happened. Jane started to meddle in my affairs, particularly about my job. She'd come into my workspace and comment, "Kate, are you playing games again? Do you find it that fun? Is that all you do on your computer?" She'd say, somewhat condescending. The truth was, I was working on the computer, but when I tried to explain, she wouldn't believe me. She'd remark, "Are you serious? You can't call such a thing work." After Jane left my room with an exaggerated sigh, it was then Tom's turn. "When are you going to stop messing around? You're an adult now. Mom's doing all the housework alone, and you're not helping at all." As expected, he showered me with criticism. I was surprised that they didn't know what remote work is in this day. No matter how much I explained my work from home job, they'd just repeat, "Get a real job. It's embarrassing that you don't find a proper job, but just play around all day." Honestly, it was infuriating. But since neither of them were willing to listen to any of my explanations, I had no idea how to handle the situation. Despite truly being busy with work every day, I was constantly accused of being jobless and labeled a neat. What was even more troublesome was how different Jane and Tom acted when my mother was around. They showed gentle faces, looking like completely different people to me. Because of this kind of behavior, even if I tried to confide in my mother about the real face about them, she probably wouldn't believe me. So I simply couldn't bring myself to talk to her about it. I believed that if I just kept doing my work day after day, maybe they would eventually understand what I do. Perhaps that would improve the atmosphere at home. It was all I could do to endure. One day, Jane confronted me, saying, "Don't you feel guilty living in this house, doing neither work nor household chores?" I couldn't remain silent anymore. "I do contribute to the household expenses," I retorted. Either being angered or dismissive, she snapped back and said, "What's that tone? How much money does a neat like you think you're contributing? Don't act all high and mighty with your measly earnings." With that, she slammed the door with such force that it echoed throughout the house. I could easily guess what would happen next. Sure enough, Tom soon appeared, berating me. "What did you say to Jane? Know your place." My patience was wearing thin. I began to think it might be time to let my mom know about the current situation. But before I could talk to her, something unexpected happened. That day, she returned from shopping for dinner accompanied by Jane. I overheard their conversation. "And you have saved up $133,000 US. That's amazing." Jane exclaimed in astonishment. "I've saved it for the future of this house," my mother kindly replied. It seemed that my mother had stopped by the bank on her way back from shopping and ran into Jane. Hearing their conversation, a seed of doubt sprouted in my heart. Perhaps Jane had her eyes on my mother's savings. Something had been bothering me for a long time. The reason Tom and Jane lived with us. If they were truly concerned about our mother, couldn't they just visit on weekends? With me already living in the house, their own private space and time would certainly decrease. Wouldn't they feel claustrophobic, especially when they both have stable jobs at large companies and don't need to give up their comfortable life as a couple? As my suspicions grew, so did my unease. Then one day, two of them came into my room, and I was subjected to words I couldn't believe. Jane, with a smile that was both friendly and condescending, said, "You always seem to be playing games. If you have money to spend on that, why not contribute a bit more to the household?" Behind her, Tom nodded in agreement, adding, "Our mother is saving money for our sake. Why don't you cooperate even a little? It seems like you're just wasting her money." I had repeatedly told them that I was contributing to the household. I've told you about it so many times, but I am contributing to the household. Don't make me repeat it over and over again. Do I have to simplify it even more for you to understand? I was truly fed up with their words, wanting them to just shut up, and I retorted more sharply than ever before. Jane's face turned red in an instant. You, who's always immersed in games and doing nothing, are contributing money. How do you say you're earning without working? Stop lying, she shouted, coming at me aggressively. My brother added fuel to the fire, berating me. All you do is play on the computer without working, and you can't even do household chores properly. We can't let someone useless like you handle the money our mother has saved up. You parasite, get out. At that moment, my suspicions turned into conviction. These two had returned home to get their hands on the household money, and after recently discovering the contents of my mother's bank book, their greed must have intensified. I must have been in their way of monopolizing the money. At this point, I thought maybe it would be better to leave the house. If they're telling me to leave, I'd simply reply, "All right, I'll go," quickly pack my things, and leave. The two of them laughed, looking as though they found immense joy in seeing me as some naive and pitiful individual. Considering how happy they seemed, I felt just a bit of pity for them. After all, their time to laugh would only last for a moment. After telling my mother everything, I left the house. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Jane. "Why has this happened? Come on, do something about it. Where are you?" Her tone was harsh, but throughout the conversation, her voice trembled, and she didn't have the same confidence as before. It's no wonder why, because the two things they cherished were both gone. The first was my mother. Before I left the house, when I told her in detail about what the two were doing, she seemed to have had her suspicions already, saying, "I thought something was off when they suddenly wanted to live with me. It was strange for them to want to live together due to concern for me without a reason. Even if there was a reason, I never wanted to live with them." My mother had noticed their ulterior motive was money. She deliberately flaunted her bank book before leaving the house. I noticed they were so interested in the bank book, so I thought about just giving it to them, she said with a mischievous grin. The second was the contents of that bank book. Jane frantically asked, "Why is all the money gone?" But I knew where the money had gone. That's because I had transferred it to another account. When I told her that, she exclaimed in shock, "What? Why would you do that? Did you steal it?" All I could say was, "Because that money was mine to begin with." That's right, I kept repeating that I was contributing significantly to the household expenses. In reality, I was contributing over $6,600 every month. $6,600. You're making that much? That must be a lie. When did this happen? Jane said. From her perspective, I was supposed to be a jobless bum, so it made sense for her to be surprised, but I wish she had listened more closely to my story. When I was younger, I frequently went out to clubs and events, and that eventually led to my current job. Now, I work in the event industry. It began as a hobby, but it seems it was my true calling. Over time, while working, I gained various skills and knowledge, building a career as an event producer. I'm actually the mastermind behind several major events held in this city. Most of my work at home involves designing venues, calculating costs, and occasionally crafting event scenarios. Depending on the scale of the event, the company pays me a substantial amount. I used to set aside about half of it, roughly $6,600, for household expenses. That's why my mother took care of everything in the house and even set up a special account to save the money properly. I've never heard this story before, Jane said, still looking incredulous. Well, I'm currently staying in a tower mansion with our mother. Would you like to hear it directly from her? When I mentioned the tower mansion, she was lost for words. When I handed the phone to my mother, she started speaking calmly. "I wouldn't be able to manage financially on my own, so Kate has been supporting me, and I never had the slightest intention of living with you two. I plan to rely on Kate's support from now on." Jane seemed too shocked to say another word. However, this wasn't the only problem for them. Jane and Tom were living in the house we had moved out of, and right now, a bunch of muscular men seemed to be frequently visiting that house. "Bring the food quickly, I'm starving. And is this even edible? Why is it so tasteless? Seriously, you're useless. You haven't even cleaned the room. Finish it quickly." I could hear them complaining freely over the phone. What's going on here? I can't make sense of any of this. What should I do? Jane's confusion was palpable over the phone. It couldn't be helped that this was happening. Actually, that house is now mine. When my father passed away, I already had an income about 5 times that of Tom's. I was making quite a lot and contributed much more money to the household than he did. Due to these circumstances, my father's will stated that the house's ownership should be transferred to me. What I do with my property is my decision. So recently, I decided to offer the house as accommodation for the staff related to my event work. They carry large equipment daily, so their strong physique is quite reliable. When I told the staff that you two are living in that house, but they can use it however they want, they enthusiastically agreed. I also had them cover their food expenses. Jane exclaimed, "This is unbelievable. It's too cruel, isn't it? Even though it's our money, it's going to be gone." It's no wonder she was upset. Although they work for a major company, their salaries aren't that high. They might be academically competent, but they seem to lack communication skills. I believe communication is truly vital in professional settings. In my case, I wasn't exceptionally outstanding in school, but I always prioritized my connections with people, which eventually became the foundation of my current success. Those youthful days, which seemed like a waste of time, are now etched as invaluable experiences linked to my job. On the other hand, Tom and Jane struggle to produce results at work, and their incomes never seem to increase. This might be why their living conditions became tougher, and why they returned to the family home. I couldn't accept Jane's condemnation of me. I'm the cruel one. Can you really say that, Jane? Since you and Tom began living in that house, have you ever contributed to the household expenses? You enjoyed a comfortable life on my earnings, right? Now it's time to pay for that. Jane had no retort to my words. She kept apologizing afterward, but it was pointless. My mother and I have started a new life, and they no longer concern us. Leaving a silent Jane behind, I hung up the phone. To avoid unnecessary trouble, I promptly blocked both Jane and Tom from contacting me. From what I've heard about their current situation, they seem to be having a tough time. The majority of their modest salaries seem to be spent on the living expenses of the staff. They don't have enough money, and they seem too intimidated by the burly men to muster the courage to flee. With the constant sarcastic remarks and pressure they face, they must be both mentally and physically exhausted. Given their situation, it must be hard for them to find any free time for themselves. Needless to say, they brought this situation upon themselves. The fact that Jane and Tom had been living off my money for their expenses, and the words they directed towards me, have come back to haunt them. That's all there is to it. On my end, I've experienced delightful changes since moving to my new apartment. My job as an event producer has been getting busier day by day, and I'm elated. My mother has been providing me with even more support, both at work and at home. We've been talking about planning an overseas trip together when we find the time. Of course, we plan to watch local shows and experience new cultures during our trip. I'm really looking forward to it. With a job I love and my dear mother, I'm currently leading a very fulfilling life every day.